Academica Media. From Academica Media Studios in Miami, Florida, it's Big Ideas in Education, a weekly recap of inspiration and innovation in your schools.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Big Ideas in Education. I am Dr. Sarah Boulos of Somerset Academy Schools, joined, of course, by my co-host, Ryan Kairalla from Doral College. Hi, Ryan.
Hi, Sarah. Great to be chatting with you.
Yeah, and welcoming everyone today with what I believe is our last episode of 2022. Yeah, so I'll mention it again later on in the episode, but this is going to be our last episode for 2022. We're going to take a little break, spend some time with our families for the holidays, and we'll come back to you in the new year. So that's exciting. So what do you want to leave our listeners with in this no pressure last episode of 2022?
Oh my gosh, when you put it that way, I feel just awful for this story because this is like the least holiday festive education story of probably I've done the whole year, but it is a very important issue.
So you're saying it's a record-setting article.
Oh, well, now you're just setting very high expectations for me. I'm sweating over here. This is a pretty wild story, though. Recently, Ed Week interviewed college student Alex Young about his work in trying to convince legislators and superintendents to ban the use of corporal punishment in Kentucky schools. Young's advocacy in this area started when he was just in the 7th grade when he proposed a corporal punishment ban as a participant in the mock government Kentucky Youth Assembly program. Today, Young works with his local representative in the Kentucky State Legislature to pass legislation, and while a ban did pass the State House recently, it failed to pass in the State Senate after the chamber decided to cancel their 2020 session due to COVID. Interestingly, according to Young, many of the superintendents and administrators that he talks to aren't even aware of the extent to which corporal punishment still takes place on school campuses, nor were some of them aware that during the 2019-2020 school year, 46% of corporal punishment incidents in Kentucky involve students with disabilities. It is worth noting that the practice has decreased considerably in recent years as Young continues his advocacy work. For example, in 2017, there were 452 documented incidents of corporal punishment in the state of Kentucky in schools. In 2021, that number was just 17. Now, Sarah, as a lawyer, I thought I would have like a better knowledge of this, but even I was surprised to learn in researching for this article that corporal punishment is still legal in public schools in 19 states. Florida is actually one of them, although the practice is banned in Miami-Dade County. And what I did know was actually the most pivotal Supreme Court case about corporal punishment actually took place in our Miami-Dade County. Ingram versus Wright, it was a case in which the Supreme Court held that corporal punishment in schools doesn't violate the 8th Amendment. And so ever since that case, we've seen this legislative movement to end this practice. And while it is largely ended in most places, there are still lots of states, including our own, where it's technically still legal.
Wow, Ryan, I'm going to tell you, I think I am like some of those board members who were shocked that this is still a practice. I think also the fact that this is the last episode of 2022 is like, how is it nearly 2023 and this is still a practice that is happening with our kids? I think I'm a little stunned. And I think that we're living in an age where we would think that this doesn't need to be mentioned, but like you said, if it's happening, it needs to be talked about, right?
Yeah, this isn't like one of these things where, like, when we were growing up, we always read about like these funny laws that are still on the books.
Yeah, you heard about it.
Yeah,
but
in Minnesota, you have to like tip your cap when you walk by a cow or something like this. This isn't
silly.
like one of those things that's still on the books, but it's never being done. There are still incidents of corporal punishment happening in public schools throughout the United States.
And I think what's additionally shocking to me is the statistic you mentioned about how 47% of those cases were students with disabilities. And I'm really struggling to understand the rationale, not to mention the legality of that. So I'm going to just initial reaction of just being stupefied and feeling that this is wrong. I can't
Yeah.
think of another word for it. But I also think, just from a behavioral standpoint, what message are we sending our kids if we tell them that physical punishment or corporal punishment is somehow a solution to a problem, right? The consequences that we provide as educators should be helping our students to understand and grow. And I don't think we're talking about like, so, as we talk about being parents and being in that foray of parenthood, that's something that I think we have to make personal decisions about how we communicate to our children, right? But I think there's a big difference between like, don't touch that hot stove, you're going to burn yourself. That's a really
Sure.
natural consequence that we would want to make sure, somebody doesn't hurt themselves. But in a school setting, as an educator, that is not the way things happen, right? We're not worried as much about like physical danger as we are with helping students to work together and understand consequences in a very different sense. So I'm trying to think through a disciplinary procedure or a consequence or a behavioral conversation at an administrative level where we would say, yep, and then if that doesn't work, let's put our hands on a child, or let's use an object to physically consequence this child.
Yeah.
It's a thing that I can't wrap my head around. And so I can only think of the negatives. If I'm being honest, I'm trying to think of any rationale why this would still be a part of our conversation at this point in history, and I'm just not finding it. And I wonder, other than just phasing it out, right? That it did not get phased out. What are the rationale? What are the reasons that schools or school districts might still be supporting this practice?
Well, I think what makes the corporal punishment unique as an education policy matter is that, unlike so many types of education policies where changing the policy requires a campaign of persuasion, right? It's bringing people together, it's advocating, it's lobbying. Corporal punishment is not as much a persuasion activity as it is an awareness activity. I think as Alex Young's experience shows, he doesn't have to persuade a lot
that
lot of people corporal
this
punishment
should not be
is
happening
immoral.
in schools, right?
It's more of just like explain to them, hey, this does happen, and they go, what?
Right. And that I think
and that's how these bans happen.
that's how I feel right now.
Yeah.
And further evidence, we don't talk about things before our show very much because I'm genuinely shocked. And I'm also surprised that it's still something that's legal in Florida. I will tell you, and this is, I know I'm not young, but I'm also not that old. And I believe it was my brother was physically punished with I think they called it paddling
Yeah, paddles.
in
Yeah.
a Florida school when I was a kid. And that was something that still happened. And I think about how old I am, how old my brothers are, and I think that wasn't that long ago. That
Yeah.
seems crazy that that would still happen in the, I think it was probably the late 90s. I can't believe that that would happen. And to think that that is still a legal practice and that it is still happening some 20, 30 years later is really scary to me.
Well, I mean, again, the seminal Supreme Court case on this matter happened in 1977 when our parents would have been in school or somewhere around that time. Like this is not some antiquated phenomenon that has made its way through the centuries. Like there are people alive and who have been paddled in school.
And clearly there are young people still that it's still happening to in school.
And I think, and unlike so many types of education policies where, it's a matter of changing minds, this is just making people aware of it. And it seems to me that the proponents of this measure, the ones that exist, seem to be doing a very good job of kind of keeping it under wraps because you've worked in education and worked in schools for your whole professional life. I'm a legal professional, and before like the last couple weeks, neither of us knew that this was still a thing. Yeah. And I think that's probably how the proponents out there want it. And so this is an awareness campaign as far as I'm concerned.
That's a great point. Well, thank you for bringing that to our awareness.
So and festive. Happy holidays.
Well, even if it's not a happy conversation to have, it's an important one to have. And let's make it our mission that in the next year, we're going to try to help make that number 0.
Right on.
Well, I think that there is a general consensus at this time of year that kids are super excited for winter break. I know I am, I'll be honest, and I know you are, Ryan. We've been talking about wanting to spend more time with our families, and I know it's especially significant for you because it's your first winter break. It's your first holiday season with your little one.
Oh, I'm so excited.
But the truth is, there is a significant group of kids who may not be as excited to have the time off from school. And that might be students from families who depend on school meals as their main source of food. Fayetteville Public Schools in Arkansas is keenly aware of that and is working with its community to see that they provide families with support in what can be a very trying time. Social worker Sarah Blickenstaff with FPS said on a weekly basis, the number of food insecure families the district pantry serves has doubled from last year. Blickenstaff said she has seen many families lose their SNAP benefits recently, and the increase in need also stems from the cost of living getting more and more expensive. She's concerned about students who rely on school meals while school is out for 2 weeks because the pantries are closed. School meals are very important, and last year, every student in the district was able to get free lunch and breakfast. This year, it's gone back to where you have to apply and qualify for free meals, but I'm sure you've all heard that sometimes students only eat at school, said Blickenstaff. And the truth is that criteria has largely remained the same, right? The criteria to qualify for those benefits have largely remained the same, but I think we've all been feeling that costs have increased significantly this year. In response, FPS says they are helping to feed 450 families over the break, the most they have ever helped. So I want us to be mindful of the fact that these families exist, obviously, not only in Fayetteville, but in our community as well. And I think it's a great time to look around and see what we can do to support others in our community who may need some help. Whether that's with something like, Toys for Tots, I've been seeing a lot of those bins around, or even something as simple as donating to a food bank. And I want to challenge our listening community to take some time in the next few weeks to see how you can use what you have to help others. Since we're going to be taking a few weeks off as a break, I know that I'm going to use that time to make sure that I take that challenge to heart. As I mentioned, we're taking 2 weeks off for Christmas and New Year's, and we'll get back to you in the new year. But in the meantime, I wanted to offer another option. So if you are in our community, if you're in South Florida, and you want to offer some support, or if you need help and you're hearing this, there is an organization we're going to link in the description box called Feeding South Florida. It's just feedingsouthflorida.org. And so we wanted to provide that as a resource, whether you wanted to be the donor or if you are in need of some support, as we know that this is not just a localized issue. We here in South Florida have had the same thing. Our kids last year and the year before during the pandemic were all getting free breakfast and free lunch, and that has changed. And we've noticed, I can say in the schools that I work with, I've noticed that has really made a difference with our kids. We've been seeing a lot of lateness, a lot of tardiness, a lot of lethargy in the morning where kids are not just getting the breakfast they're used to getting. And it's really tough when you want to provide some academic instruction and your kids are just hungry. It's a very difficult position to be in.
Wow, that is powerful. And it does remind me a lot of some past conversations we've had on this show that we normally have around this time of year, where we take some time to acknowledge how the holiday season affects our students differently, often depending on their socioeconomic situation. Many of us who see this holiday season as a positive, happy time are in contrast to those who see their school as a lifeline, as a place where they can get fed and have social stability, and they lose that over the holidays. So much so that we've even recommended on this program, citing experts, that as teachers, be careful with the language you use with your students this time of year. Don't say, "Oh, are you excited?" or "Are you going to have a happy, fantastic Christmas break?" Because for many students, that's not the case, and we want to be sensitive to that point. And I think what you're talking about now is just a natural extension of that. It's acknowledging that this time of year hits students differently, and whereas many students see the leaving of school for holiday break as a welcome rest and an opportunity to kind of get away from school, Others see losing that school stability as a difficult experience. And so to the extent that social services and just the generosity of all of us can help bridge that gap, it's certainly a worthy endeavor.
Yeah. I've been seeing some really cool things in some of the schools that I work with. I'm really proud of our schools that they've been putting together some of these programs where I've started things like 12 days of kindness or 12 days of service, right? To kind of play on that holiday, 12 days of Christmas or 12 days of gifts, which is something I think our kids are being inundated with in the media, instead of focusing on things like gifts, which are definitely not a guarantee for our students, but to focus on something like service, on kindness, on what can they offer to someone else. And talking too about breaks and what do they expect over break. I encourage educators to make a lot of those kind of assignments private. Don't always, put the cut out snowman with what I'm going to do over break as a
Yeah.
public facing document for everyone to see, because some students may not be comfortable with that. And I think it also allows teachers to use that as kind of a journaling activity to see where your students are and maybe who might need some support.
It's a valuable way to get some communication and feedback from your students and maybe get a window into their situation that they may not be able to give you if they have to just write one sentence on a snowman for all of their
Yeah.
classmates to see. That's excellent perspective. And not to sound like, too wholesome about this, but I mean, I certainly am favoring the idea of all of us kind of shifting our perspective on the holidays and seeing it as an opportunity to give and help others, not just because it's the right thing to do and it's going to help our fellow person, but actually this past week I was on a business trip with some other education professionals, and our guest speaker was a gentleman named Dr. Sanjeev Chopra, who often travels around the world as a motivational speaker, talking about happiness and what gives people true contentment. And what he had suggested is that most of the research shows that sustained happiness, like the actual, like that stays with you, not just the happiness that goes up and then you go right back down to feeling bad again, comes not from the things you get, but from what you give. And acts of service, acts of kindness, that's the stuff that brings you sustained happiness and contentment. So if we, seeing this season not as a way to become happier by what we can get, but
Right.
imparting to our students that this is a happy season because it gives us the opportunity to give ourselves and realize a lot of joy from that, and also the additional benefit of helping others. The more that we can, as an education system, make that message clear, I think that's going to ultimately lead to a much more favorable holiday season for all of us.
I love that. It also reminds me of some of our schools use programs like Leader in Me and some other programs that have this kind of character education. And one of those tenets is that everyone can do something, right? Everyone is able to do something. And the idea that we are empowering our students, our staff, everyone around us to consider what they have to offer. What can they provide? What can they give as an act of service, as an act of kindness to their community? Who are we? What is our place? And what can we offer? I think there's even a jingle or, a song that the kids sing, something about like, no matter how small you are, you're never too small to help or too small to do something. Everyone can do something. I'm not going to sing it because I don't remember it, and I'm also not sure where it came from. And nobody wants to hear that, if we're being honest. So that is my gift to you, is to not sing.
Dr. Chopra even had suggested during at this conference that when we think of the word philanthropy, we think of like donating money. But what he had suggested is that, philanthropy is actually 3 T's: time, talent, treasure. And you can give any one of those and be a benefit to others. And the happiness benefits that come from giving can come from donating any of those 3 things. So something to keep in mind, even if you think you can't help others because you don't have a real fat wallet.
Wow, I love that. Okay,
Yeah, right?
something to think about. Well, thank you so much for being with us throughout 2022. It has been an incredible year. It's been not the easiest of years, but I hope that we've provided a little bit of perspective and inspiration for you. We can't wait to see you in the new year or hear from you in the new year. Please feel free to stay connected with us. You can use the hashtag Big Ideas in Education or reach out to us at Academica Media. It is great to have you. Don't forget, to think about how you can give up your time, your talents, or your treasure. I really like that. I'm going to use that.
That's good, right?
And if you are in the South Florida community, don't forget that there is a great opportunity to support or get support from Feeding South Florida. Have a wonderful holiday break, and we'll see you next year.
The views expressed on the preceding program have been those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Academica, its clients, staff, affiliates, or advertisers.